Please, thanks. Right, thank you, Mark. Welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the Aberdeen Local Review Body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for access after the meeting, and all attendees switch off their microphones when not speaking. I will now ask the clerk to undertake a roll call of the membership participating today, and for all members to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced by the clerk, so that it's clear in the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded by the clerk for the minute. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room or meeting during consideration of any application. And I'll pass it over to you, Mr. Masson.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll have Councillor Bolton as chairperson.
Here.
Councillor Hendrickson.
Present.
And Councillor Reynolds.
Here.
That's the three members of the local review body today.
Okay, that's super. The meeting has been convened in response to two requests for a review of the decisions taken by the appointed officers under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed on the notice calling the meeting. I, Councillor Bolton, will be the chairperson. I will now ask Mr. Masson, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed to conduct these reviews. Mr. Masson.
Thank you. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with a local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attentions in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Masson. Now turning to consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the replacement of a boundary hedge with a timber fence, the front of 94 Wallace Bray Road, planning reference number 200895/DPP. We will hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out Mr. Evans' attendance today provides us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. If I could pass over to you now, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take a second to get the presentation shared on screen here. There we are. Hopefully everyone can see that now. Yes, so thank you, Convener. As you said, this is a request for review against a delegated decision to refuse planning permission for the replacement of a boundary hedge with a timber fence to the front of 94 Wallace Bray Road. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. The applicant has indicated on the notice of review that no new matters have been raised in the review submissions, and in terms of the procedure by which the review shall be conducted, the applicants expressed the view that no further procedure in their review is required. I'll provide some background to the case before handing back to you, Chair, and members can then decide how they want to proceed. The application site is a residential plot which is located on the northern side of Wallacebrae Road in Dainston, accessed via Laurel Drive. The site comprises a single-storey residential dwelling house, detached dwelling house of modern design, which occupies a corner plot. And you can just see that from the location plan there, and we've got an aerial view with the site outlined in red, where if you can see my cursor, you can just see the position of the hedge there, sort of to the side of the house, but fronting onto the public pavement. We've also got some images that have been supplied by the applicant that I'll run through as well. And in the top right hand corner of the screen, you can see just where those have been taken from on the location plan. So the property has south and west elevations fronting Wallacebrae Road. Driveway runs down the eastern side of the property, providing off-street parking and also access to the property's front door, which is on that right-hand side as you look from the street. The garden to the western side of the property is enclosed by this substantial Leylandii hedge of approximately 2.3 metres in height. The site's located in a wider area that local development plan identifies as a residential area where policy H1 of the local development plan applies. So just flicking through these images here, you can get a sense of the scale of the hedge at present, and just as it continues around that curve in the road, and that's down the boundary with the adjoining neighbour there. So that's just some proposed elevations. Before I move on, in terms of planning history, there's no specific planning history of relevance for this site. However, there is a similar case nearby at number 3 Wallacebrae Road, where a hedge was replaced with a fence of similar sort of proportions in 2015, although the distinction there is that it didn't come forward of the building line marking the front of the house, if you see what I mean. So in that case, the fence sort of continued around in this direction. If you'd like later, I can come back to that and show you in Google Street View, just to give an indication of the context. So just moving on to the proposal itself, detailed planning permission sought for the replacement of that boundary hedge with a timber fence along the northwest, southwest and south boundaries of the site. That fence measures 1.8 metres in height and runs along a 17-metre stretch of the boundary with number 96, before running along the boundary between the side garden and the public pavement, and then aligning with the western side wall of the property. The fence is shown as being stained mid-brown on completion. These are just the sort of construction sections, so giving you an indication of the fence boards and the sort of supporting rails, and then this lower image here is just the plan view from above, so you can see the fence posts that be sited on the inside of the fence within the garden. Just a further section there showing the same thing really, the supporting posts, the fence boards, and then the supporting rails, and that's just below ground level. So turning to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, these are stated in full in the decision notice, which is on pages 37 to 39 of the agenda pack, but just summarised here. Firstly, contends that the fence's siting, materials, massing and height are incongruous in this location, and highlights its position forward of the front of the house and hard up against the pavement as being visually obtrusive in the street scene. Those factors are considered to result in a detrimental impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding residential area, and the appointed officer identified conflict with policies D1 relating to quality placemaking by design, H1 residential areas of the local development plan, as well as relevant supplementary guidance contained in the Householder Development Guide. It's also pointed to the potential cumulative erosion of visual amenity if similar proposals were to be replicated in the local area. and highlighted conflict with the equivalent policies or corresponding policies in the emerging proposed local development plan. Ultimately, the officer concluded that there were no material considerations in this case that would warrant approval of the application. So turning then to the applicant's case, this is set out in the notice of review that's included at pages 47 to 50 of the agenda pack, and makes the main points as follows. Firstly, contends that the proposal wouldn't set any sort of precedent, as the property in question is cited uniquely, I think relating or referring to the corner plot, and therefore is not readily comparable to others in the surrounding area. I think that's possibly also a reference to the fact that its main garden is to the side of the property rather than to the rear. Refers to a suggested alternative as significantly reducing the enclosed garden area. Now, sorry, just flicking the wrong direction there. At a guess, I would say the suggested alternative would have been to scale the fence back so that it aligned with the frontage of the property, similar to the other case nearby that I mentioned. But the applicant's concern is that to do so would significantly reduce the extent of the enclosed sort of private garden to the side of the property. The applicant's highlighted the lack of objection from neighbours to the proposal, and contends that the existing hedge is much more incongruous in its height and matting than the proposed fence would be, and that this proposal therefore offers a preferable outcome. In terms of consultations, the Roads Development Management team within the council had initially looked for the fence to be set back from the pavement a short distance, but later reconsidered that and is now satisfied that they've no objection to the proposal as things stand. The local Dainston Community Council provided no response. There were no objections from members of the public in relation to this application. So at that point, convener, I'd just hand back to you for members to consider whether any further procedures required.
Okay. Mr. Evans, could I get you to perhaps, before we go into discussion about whether we have sufficient information, if we could see that Google Map street view for that house that you referenced on this
Yep, that's no problem. Should have that somewhere here. So what I would say is just bear in mind the images here are dated from July 2008 as we go along the street. So this is the application property initially, and then if we look down the street, you can see there's a large Leylandii hedge on that plot on the corner there, which is number 3. As you move down, the imaging becomes more recent, and if I flick forward magically, it becomes a fence. But you'll see that, as I mentioned before, the fencing there has been sort of, it only extends as far as the front wall of the house, sort of denoting the front and the sort of more private enclosed rear garden, whereas the current proposal would step forward of that and capture some of that ground which sits forward of the front wall of the house. So there's really a matter there to consider in terms of how significant
Can we go back to the actual application site, please? So they want to take it all the way to the driveway?
Yeah, just sort of curving round with the edge of the pavement, and then it sort of lines up through with the sidewall of the house there. So I think the aerial view is probably quite helpful for that. Yeah, so it currently does that sort of curve in the corner and then just steps up to join with the house. So the fence would just do the same thing effectively.
Okay, so it's not actually coming in front of the bungalow itself.
No, that's right. It's stepping sort of forward of the sort of line that would continue from the front of the house, but it's not directly in front of it.
Okay. That bit, I'm just slightly confused what you mean. So it's can you maybe just?
Sorry, yeah. So the fence is essentially, it's marking the border with the adjoining property at number, I think it was 96, and then curving around the edge of the pavement and then stepping up there just to connect with the sidewall of the house. So they would still have this open area of front garden, if you will. But I think the alternative that may have been suggested to them by the officer was that the fence follow the front wall of the house and continue along here, so that everything north of that cursor would be the enclosed rear garden. This would just serve as an extended part of the front garden.
Okay, all right. Can we see a front visual again then of that house, the one that you just showed us before?
Is that the other example you mean?
No, this one.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, please.
There we go.
Okay, so so currently it attaches to just beyond the satellite disc on the wall. So it runs down there, and we're suggesting it should be more of a sort of an angle. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. Well, I'm speculating a little just based on what the applicant said about their discussions with the case officer, but I'm thinking what they would have had suggested to them was that the fence just continue straight, sort of as if it were flush with the front wall of the house there, if that makes sense.
I think so. Members, does anybody want to ask Mr. Evans about any pictures that he's got up at the moment before we go into deciding whether we've got enough information?
Yes, Convener, if I may, please.
Yeah, Councillor Reynolds.
Gavin, you say that the photograph that we're looking at the moment is 2008, did you say?
2008, but the applicant has provided some more recent photos that were in the presentation there, so it's not much change since then. If anything, it's probably a little bit larger. So these are contemporary images, these ones. Okay, and this particular hedge at the moment is 2.3, and the fence is going to be 2.4. Is that correct? I think the fence is 1.8 meters, Councillor Reynolds. Oh, so right. it's actually a reasonable amount shorter than the hedge. Okay, so it's the post that they're talking about that's 2.4. I saw 2.4 somewhere. Right, yes, that might be because the posts are sunk into the ground, so right. There's maybe 600 mil worth of sort of below ground level, if you see what I mean. That's terrific. Now, again, looking at that and looking at the one that you've just come off, the one that takes you right around the side, it looks as if that hedge is actually overlapping the pavement. And I know as a ward councillor, I get loads of complaints from residents where the householders haven't cut back the hedges. And I guess my two colleagues will have had the same sort of problems. Yeah. So by removing that, it will actually remove an obstruction on the pavement as well, I guess.
Okay. Before we go on to sort of discussing, Councillor Reynolds, I just want to check if there's any questions on the pictures that were up, or if you want to see any other pictures, and then we'll decide if we've got enough information. Councillor Hendrickson, do you have any questions for Gavin just on these pictures?
I'm not sure if it's relevant to the pictures. I was just wondering how much of the garden space they would actually lose if the fence was actually taken back to the wall line. Yeah. Okay. Well, but I wasn't sure whether that was relevant to the pictures. But
well, I don't know if you can show from there, can you, Gavin?
I can give you something of an answer. The distance between the front wall of the house and the pavement, just at this point, if you can see my cursor there, is just shy of 6 meters. But obviously that's tapering away as you go around the bend. So at its most, it's 6 meters at that point, but then gradually diminishing.
Okay, thanks. Okay, right. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated in the review documents of the local body to proceed without any further procedure being taken, i.e. a site visit or anything. So are members happy to continue making the decision today, or do you require any further procedure? Councillor Reynolds?
Yes, I'm happy.
Councillor Hendrickson?
I'm happy, convener.
And so am I. So we're all of the mindset that we have sufficient information to make an informed decision today. As members feel that they have sufficient information, we'll now hear from Mr. Evans on the relevant policies and considerations for the review. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just pop this presentation back on screen. There we are. So just turning to the relevant policy considerations for this site and for this proposal. As I mentioned before, the application is located in a an area that the local development plan identifies as a residential area, so policy H1 applies. This sets out a series of criteria that new developments will be required to satisfy. So proposals for new development will be acceptable in principle if they firstly do not constitute overdevelopment. In this case, obviously, there's no increase to the footprint of the dwelling. It's simply the means of enclosing the garden that's at issue. Secondly, should not have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. And that's where there's a judgment for members to make in terms of what you consider the character of the local area to be here. You might want to look at, for example, what other boundary enclosures are common in the surrounding area in coming to that sort of view. Thirdly, proposals should not result in the loss of valuable or valued areas of open space as defined in the Council's open space audit. In this case, we're talking about a domestic residential curtilage, so there's no public open space affected. And lastly, proposals should comply with relevant supplementary guidance through the local development plan. In this case, the Householder Development Guide sets out some general principles for development and also some specific criteria for boundary enclosures. So in addition to that residential policy, all policies are required to have regard to policy D1, quality placemaking by design. This requires development to be of a high standard, which demonstrates an understanding of its context. And in assessing proposals, this links to 6 qualities of good placemaking, which are that development should be distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, adaptable and resource efficient. Obviously, because this is a fairly small-scale domestic proposal, there's limited scope for it to satisfy some of those. Turning to the relevant supplementary guidance, the Householder Development Guide, in terms of its general principles, this sets out that work should be architecturally compatible in design and scale with an original house in the surrounding area. So again, it's that understanding of what the local context is and how consistent this proposal is or isn't with that. Materials to be used should be complementary to the original building. In this case, I mentioned that this is a mid-brown stained timber fence, so you might want to have a look at the surrounding area, just in sort of street view, for example, and see how that might fit in. Alterations should not serve to overwhelm or dominate the original form or appearance of the dwelling house and should be visually subservient in terms of height, massing and scale. Proposals should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example through privacy, daylight or general amenity. As Councillor Reynolds highlighted, the height of this fence is actually lower than that of the existing hedge, so I think you would perhaps see that there would be a net benefit in terms of light to neighbouring properties. And also approvals predating this guidance are not treated as a precedent in the decision-making process. There's also some specific content on fences and boundary enclosures. This states that in all instances, the scale and form of boundary enclosures should be appropriate to their context and should not detract from the street scene as a result of inappropriate visual impact. Also, proposals for boundary enclosures will not be permitted where they would result in an unacceptable impact on the amenity of neighbouring dwellings. So really those points are perhaps captured by the earlier general principles already. In terms of material considerations and just general things to think about in coming to your view, members. Firstly, the zoning. We heard the policy tests that are set out by policy H1 for residential areas, those being, would it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area? And secondly, would it comply with the relevant supplementary guidance? In terms of design, is a proposal of sufficient design quality, having regard to factors like scale, siting, footprint, proportions, and materials or colour, for example. So really overall, you're coming to a conclusion on whether you feel this proposal complies with the development plan as a whole, and also whether there are any material considerations that you feel would outweigh the development plan in this particular case. So we would then look for you to articulate some reasons for that decision, and if members think that there are any conditions that might be attached to any decision, and happy to assist with that. So I'll just hand back to you at that point, convener. Thank you.
Rebecca. Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. That's been helpful. Members, questions for Mr. Evans. Councillor Hendrickson, do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Looking at the hedge that we have at the moment, it's quite an intimidating hedge, and I just feel that the fence would be, in that setting, especially as it's on a corner, would be equally as intimidating. Is there any way that we could look at putting in conditions that come to some sort of compromise regarding the positioning of the fence within line to the building? I noticed that there was a gate on the side of the house, I think, and I just wondered if it would be possible, would it be possible to put the alignment in line with the current position of the gate, so that it draws the fence back from that road, and lessens the impact, but still allows them to keep apart, extend the size of the garden, well, keep the garden to it much as it is at the moment.
Yeah, ultimately, Councillor Henriksen, we would have to make a decision based on what's before us at this point. We wouldn't be able to use conditions to alter the nature of the proposal. It's really just about the details, rather than actually changing the position, for example. So I'm afraid that wouldn't be something we could do.
Okay. Thanks. Councillor Reynolds, have you got any questions for Mr. Evans? As I say, we will discuss this between ourselves on the recording, and it's just if there's any questions around the application or the policies that you might have at the moment. Councillor Reynolds?
I don't think so. I think Gavin's covered everything that I need to know on that one.
Okay. I don't have any questions. I think what I might ask though is if Mr. Evans could give us maybe a little scoot round with Street View, so that we can get an overall impression. I think I'm reasonably aware of the area, and I know that Councillor Reynolds will be, but just for completeness, that would be helpful. Sorry, Mr. Evans.
Yep, that's no problem. Just get this up here. As always, I would just bear in mind that some of the imaging on these is quite old, so 2008, so there may be some degree of change, but in terms of getting a general feel for the area, it's probably not so very changed. So in terms of boundary enclosures, you can see there is a bit of a mix of walls and fences. However, generally speaking, those are lower forward of the sort of front wall of properties, tend to be no more than 1 metre in height, and the higher enclosures are usually to the rear. Although when you do have a corner property like this and it's a side garden, then that's obviously slightly different.
Wait a minute, this is quite interesting. I think that gives us an overall impression of the area. Do we need any further street view, or are we content with what we see?
Yeah, could we go along the street a little bit, just to the right there, Gavin?
Just to the right here.
There seems to be another Leylandii along there, is there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one here. Oh,
Yeah.
Suddenly got shorter from one image to the next. Yeah, it's had a bit of a trim in between Google visits. But yeah, that one is a bit set back from the road, so it doesn't have the same issue you mentioned before with overhanging the pavement or anything. Not that there actually is a pavement in this section.
Okay, that's fine for me, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fine. Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Okay, members, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss. We've obviously decided that we're going to make a decision today. So I'll just highlight that all the representations relating to this application are included in the report. So if we could maybe just go into discussion around obviously what we've heard from Mr. Evans and the information within the report. Councillor Reynolds, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to kick off there. I think one of the difficulties that the planners have in general is that these estates are planned as open landscape estates, and of course you get individual owners doing different things, building walls, building fences, and of course in this instance putting up the leylandii. And of course, from a planning point of view, we can't refuse a householder to put in a leylandii. Would that be correct? Yes. So we have this large green monstrosity that's on the corner of the property there. And looking at the application, obviously they put that in to regain a bit of, or retain a bit of privacy, so they've got privacy in their own private garden. And I guess if we were looking at allowing the development and putting in this fence, the objective is still served. They're going to have the privacy in the garden, but I guess the plus point from my point of view is that the leylandii is no longer overlapping the pavement and creating, particularly, for example, I had a case 3-4 weeks ago, I think it was, where a similar situation, and a young lady with a twin buggy could not get on the pavement. She had to go onto the road. So it resolves that sort of problem, and we're not going to have complaints of that nature again in that particular case or in that particular property.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councillor Hendrickson, would you like to add something? It's just so that, and then I'll kind of join the discussion.
No, I think my main question was answered, whether we could actually come to some sort of compromise with the positioning of the fence, but obviously that's not the case. Looking around the area, and I take Councillor Reynolds' observation about overgrowing hedges. I think that's a common problem throughout the city. But looking at the layout of the streets and everything, it's got a certain look about it, and I just feel that the positioning of the fence right next to the pavement would be as imposing as the hedge, and I think it would spoil the view. The other thing that I would be slightly concerned about with the positioning of the fence right next to the road was, I noticed that it's on a corner, and there were actually vehicles on the street view actually parked on the other side of the street on the pavement. Now, as we go forward, that's no longer going to be allowed, I believe. So it does seem to me to cause a bit of a safety hazard, and I'm surprised that roads didn't raise this, although it's in a cul-de-sac, and I think anything that would improve or help with the look of the street and keep the street as it was originally laid out would be helpful. I would be happy if the fence was actually moved back in line of the building, because that would have a sort of, it would retain the overall look of the area, allow some privacy, but yeah, it would keep the spirit of the area, because the fence that we looked at the other end of the street, that, although that's on a corner, it's not as imposing. It is actually set back. It remains in proportion to the streetscape, and that's my overall thoughts on it at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Henderson. If I could just pick up your point about your concerns about the roads. Obviously, roads didn't object to it. They had initially made comment, and we heard this earlier from Mr. Evans, that they had made an initial sort of concern, but on reflection had decided that it wasn't actually. So they haven't objected to it. So in terms of road safety, they're very comfortable. Otherwise, as we would have seen a formal objection. So I suppose we have to be careful to view a road safety issue that isn't substantiated by our officers. What we also, the other thing, can I just check again, Mr. Evans, that the existing fence at number 3, it is up to the pavement edge, isn't it? In terms of this?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. I just have in mind, but you know what it is, you suddenly doubt your memory.
Yeah, I've actually got the plan handy, so I'll just share my screen quickly and
Thanks.
let you see for yourselves. So this was the planning application drawing for that that site at number 3, so you can see it's right up to the edge of the pavement and edge of the boundary there.
And it's the same height, isn't it?
Ooh, I don't have that picture. 2 seconds.
Like the same height as
Sorry, I've been on the page. It needs to be. I've been on the page too long. It needs to be refreshed. So
okay, no problem.
669.
Yeah, 1.8.
Yeah, just over 1.8. Yeah, so pretty much the same.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Now going back, I know we've gone through questions, but again, I'm trying to get it clear in my mind where we take the physical picture of the application site.
So that one okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So we've got the. I'm just trying to imagine where the proposal of the fence is acceptable. What are we suggesting we, you like? I'm trying. I don't know how to square it off. Yeah.
What I would say is that was me perhaps speculating just based on what the applicants said about a suggestion from the officer. But if I had to guess, if you can see my cursor on the screen there.
Yeah.
And so that's the front wall of the house. I think it's most likely what's been suggested is that the fence go directly across. So following the line of the front wall, and then could be hard up against the pavement when it's more of the side of the plot rather than the front, if you follow. Yeah.
So we're probably talking, what, about an extra metre or so in garden space that would be lost?
As I mentioned before, I think it's sort of just shy of 6 meters here from the front wall to the pavement, but then that distance tapers away as the curve continues around. So
I was just trying to kind of unusable space rather than the length from the wall to the pavement. It was more sort of how much garden toward that it would lose in terms of usable space.
Yeah. I suppose at the moment a significant amount of this width would be accounted for by the hedge, so there's a bit of gain, a bit of loss in that compromise.
I mean, it is a difficult one, because I would agree with Councillor Reynolds that these schemes were certainly designed in a way that gave a feeling of openness, but at the same time, what we've got is now, whether it's obviously it's a natural boundary with hedge that's been created with hedge, which is very intimidating, and clearly it has given issues to the neighbour next to. Lobbed off all the branches on that side, which you see in one of the photographs, and the fact that nobody's objected, i.e. the neighbours haven't objected to it, and we haven't got an objection from the Community Council. And I would agree with Councillor Reynolds that things that's encroaching onto the footway. However, what we can't do is, if you like, use what's a problem because it's maybe being not maintained as well as it should be, is a reason to allow something that we don't feel is appropriate. So it's all of that kind of discussion that you have to think through. I just wonder, I suppose my concern is that, okay, it's a marginal change that we believe that would be required if you look at the other house at the other end of the street, but would that be enough for us to refuse it? In my view, I'm just trying to weigh up the impact, because we're not saying it's not acceptable up to the pavement edge, from my understanding, and that it would just be simply a realigning of the front elevation of the fence. Now, I'm just trying to picture it if it's going to be such an extent or such an improvement that it would support me upholding the officer's recommendation. So that's my slight quandary. It's not because it's coming up to the pavement edge, because we see that the hedge is over the pavement edge. So that element is almost sort of Does anybody else want to say anything further before we kind of maybe reach a decision? Councillor Reynolds?
I don't think so. I've said what I thought about the pavement edge, etc., and the way that the shrubbery is actually over the pavement at the moment. I think from the applicant's point of view, it's going to be a win-win situation, and the same for the neighbours, because looking at this particular picture, I would guess the Lowandi there is on a regular basis coming through that fence or whatever it is. So if there's a proper fence going up there, I'm sure that the neighbour would appreciate it. But I know that's not part of the consideration, but looking at the whole thing, the applicant will be winning as well, because taking that Leylandii out will give them far more garden space on their side as well.
Yeah. Councillor Henriksson, is there anything else that you would like to add?
It's just that looking at the moment, I'm looking at the aerial photograph, and I just wonder whether, if we actually allow this to go without cutting it back so that it maintains the open street view, because there's various houses that are on corner plots as well, and if we start allowing it to develop throughout the scheme, I think you could actually end up with destroying the overall look of the scheme and the intentions of the original designer. And then my fear is that you would end up with almost streets being very, very enclosed. That's my main concern about allowing this to go ahead without the modification and bringing it in line with the front of the building. Whereas the one on the corner, which I'm looking at the moment, it's hard up against the pavement, but if you actually look around the front of the house, it still retains very much a sort of open aspect for that part of the street. And I just think that we could actually be leading ourselves getting into a precedent here, which could, over time, if we get more and more applications for this sort of thing, particularly on corner plots, you sort of start losing the overall look and the overall openness of the area. That's why I'm personally in favour of allowing the fence, but provided it's in line with the front of the building, so that it does keep some sort of openness to the street area. I think that's my feelings on it.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Henriksson. Councillor Reynolds.
Yeah, again, I think I've said everything I can there. I think the application, I understand where Councillor Henriksson's coming from, because you're taking away an amenity, but the amenity has already been taken away with that gas Leylandii. So what is the better of the two evils, as far as I'm concerned? And I think, looking at the fence, it will far better tie in with the community than something that we have no control over at all.
Okay, folks. Well, obviously, we've had, I think, quite a good discussion around it. And just before we actually go to kind of making a decision on how we determine this, can I just make sure that there's no further requirements to ask Mr. Evans any questions on policies or photographs just before we determine it finally? No?
Not from me.
Right, okay, so we'll move on to the decisions. So if I take yourself first, Councillor Reynolds, if you could please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for your decision referring to planning policies where appropriate.
Okay, so certainly I think the application should be approved. As it stands at the moment, I think it's an improvement on what is already there. I don't think there anything else to say.
Okay. Councillor Henriksson.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to propose that we uphold the officer's original decision. I think by putting in a fence there, you would be taking away from the character of the area. I see that there is to me, there's an acceptable compromise here, which could keep allow the applicant to put up a fence, but still maintain the fact that the front of the building and the overall streetscape coming along there actually still fits in with what was originally designed. And so I would uphold the officer's decisions on this one, unless there was a compromise made.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hendrickson. You know, it is a difficult one, and we see many issues around hedges, and they are kind of the sort of go-to by many people rather than going through a planning process to erect fences, etc. And I understand the impact that these can have, and we've seen high hedges legislation and everything else. But again, what we shouldn't do is allow something that's maybe not right to be replaced by something else that's not right. However, having said that, looking at what's been proposed, I mean, I was a bit concerned about the loss of openness. The fact that the front of the house is still completely open, that there's the grass to the front of the house that projects the front garden. So from the streetscape, if you're walking along it, you still have a sense of openness. You know, and I just feel for the slight change that we do visually to the loss that might be then for the residents themselves in terms of their amenity, I don't think the impact on, you know, if you look at H1, the impact on amenity and the impact on the character of the area, I don't think it's significant enough. And every application, you know, I hear what you're saying, Councillor Hendrickson, about precedent. Each application will be determined in its own merit, and it is a slightly different angle from, you know, the corner is slightly differently configured to the other house. I think what I would want though is maybe Mr. Evans to put some condition around the finish of the fence, because I'm not sure perhaps the finishes that's been proposed might be as appropriate, because I think they're looking at dark brown, whereas the other end, so you're looking at the area around there. I think perhaps Mr. Evans might find an appropriate condition just to condition the finish. So I would be, you know, it is a very marginal one, this, because I do believe that the estate was designed to have an open feel. However, I think the oppressiveness of the existing edge and impact on the amenity and character of the area for other residents will be actually improved significantly by the removal of the hedge and the replacement of a fence. You know, as I say, there's not an objection by roots. There's not an objection to it being at the edge of the pavement. Excuse me. The objection is simply the kind of the adjoining to the house, whether it's more graduated around the corner or to the front. And I think that for me, that there's enough comfort, there's enough retained garden space at the front that won't detract from the overall amenity, but will actually, on balance, improve the impact on the wider amenity for people using the pavement and the neighbouring properties. So on this occasion, with that additional condition, in terms of finish, I would move to overturn the officer's recommendation with that condition. Mr. Masson, could you just take us through a verbal vote, because clearly there is a division on this, and it's important we have it for the record and the recording. Thank you.
I was just going to check that Councillor Reynolds was minded as well, that the finish to the fence would be taken into his consideration as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think the finish on the fence at number 3 is the sort of finish that we're looking for, rather than, you know, a dark oak finish or anything like that, which would not fit with the character of the area at all. So yes, I would go along the same route as Councillor Bolton. Okay, Councillor Bolton, I'm quite clear. I think the recording would be quite clear, but in terms of what you've agreed, you're overturning the officer's decision and approving the application with that condition to the finish of the fence, similar to number 3, by a majority of 2 to 1.
Yeah, can I just check, Mr. Evans, is there any other conditions that you would suggest that we should put on this application?
No, I don't think so, Chairperson. The colour's probably about the extent of it. The drawings do refer to a mid-brown rather than a darker brown, but if we could just get a sample of that from the applicant before they go ahead, then that would be the usual sort of thing to do.
Okay, that helps. Fine, Mr. Evans, thank you. Okay, so with that, we can agree that that's the conclusion of this LRB, that the application has been approved subject to additional materials, and that's the end of that. If we could now turn to the second review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the extension of dormers to the rear and the installation of replacement windows to the rear and side 57 Blenheim Place. Planning reference number 200660/DPP. We will now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, and he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in fact, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Mr. Evans, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll just get the presentation up on screen here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, thanks.
So yes, before us we have a request for review against the delegated decision to refuse planning permission for the extension of dormers to the rear and installation of replacement windows to the rear and side of 57 Blenheim Place. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. No new matters have been raised in the submission, and in terms of procedure, the applicant has requested a site visit to allow members to understand the surrounding context for themselves. I'll give a brief intro to the background of the case, and then members can decide for themselves whether they think that's warranted. Just by way of an update, obviously, Councillor Bolton, you'll be aware of this. I think we had a different lineup on the local review body previously, but this case was previously before the 16th of December meeting of the local review body. And at that time, it was resolved that an inaccuracy in the application's description should be corrected and neighbours re-notified before the local review body would actually consider the case. So that re-notification has been undertaken and no further representations or objections have been received as a result of that. So just for the benefit of the other members on today's review body, the description referred to the installation of replacement windows to the rear and side of the whole of the property, whereas in actual fact the application relates to windows on both the front, rear and side of the upper flat only. So I'll show you that in the elevations though. So in terms of a site description, the application concerns the upper flat in a 2-storey building with a hipped dormer window, 2 hipped dormer windows to the rear and roof lights to the front. The upper flat occupies the first floor and roof space of the property. I can come back to these images. I'll just show you from the front first of all. Yes, it occupies the first floor and the roof of the building. The property lies on the western side of Blenheim Place. That's perhaps best shown here. The western side of Blenheim Place, directly opposite its junction with Osborne Place. The property is of a traditional granite construction with a slate roof and is served by a rear lane, off which there is garage access. The windows in the upper flat are of a non-traditional sash and case look-alike style. So you can just see there, these are sort of coated aluminium. So not original features, I think, is the main point to take from that. A centrally positioned door gives access to the lower flat at number 59, with access for number 57 obtained from the door just set off to the left-hand side of the image here. With a stair enclosure positioned up the gable, you can just see the slated roof for that continuing up. The windows in the lower flat are mixed with white UPVC frames on the front elevation and a brown wood effect frame present on the rear. I've just got an image of the rear elevation there. So this application is concerning the first floor and the roof level. While the rear dormers do have a traditional appearance with a pinded or hipped slated roof, they're not understood to be original features of the building, being of a larger scale than might be expected for that period. To the south, this is perhaps best shown in the aerial view, the property is bounded by a car park which serves offices at the nearby Blenheim House. Further south on the opposite side of that surface car park is another office building, Blenheim Gate, which is of a modern construction. And I think we have some photos that show that as well. So this is just a side elevation which, you know, is directly onto that neighbouring car park. So this is a stair enclosure for the property, and the two existing dormer windows with sort of slated sides and a traditional style hipped roof. And that's just from street level, looking onto the side wall. Sorry, just lost my place there. Last point, the site lies within the Albine Place and Rubislaw Conservation Area. This slide just goes along with the proposal. So members will note that the application description and the officer's report refer to the extension of dormers to the rear and replacement of windows at the side and rear of the property, with the assessment having been undertaken on that basis. However, on closer inspection of the plans, which don't clearly identify those to be replaced, for example, with colouring or numbering, it's evident that the window schedule and floor plans show that this proposal in fact relates to the replacement of windows in the upper flat only, to both the front and back of the building. That's confirmed by the description provided on the applicant's originally submitted application form. So this slide just shows the windows to be replaced, highlighted in red. I've just added that highlighting for clarity. So in summary then, the proposal involves the replacement of existing non-traditional windows in the upper flat with sliding timber sash and case frames, along with the construction of a new flat-roofed box dormer to the rear, which you can just see on this image here, with a slated linking panel. The dormer would be formed using larch cladding with a grey roofing membrane on its flat roof. In terms of the appointed officer's decision, sorry, this is just the side view, so gives you an indication of what that would look like from the side. And that's just the window schedule with the cross section of the sliding sash and case timber frame. And floor plans, so you can get an indication there of these dash lines show the lie-in or the coombs in the roof. So this is the benefit, if you like, to the residents in terms of the usable space and the increased head height as a result of that. That dormer with linking section, you wouldn't have the same lie-ins where you would have to sort of stoop. In terms of the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, these are again included in the agenda pack in the decision notice, but just a quick summary. Firstly, notes that the proposed replacement windows are of an acceptable design and materials, which is appropriate to the site's location within a conservation area and consistent with relevant national and local guidance on window replacement. So the officer was satisfied with the window replacement, and the refusal was as a result of the dormer window. Secondly, highlights that the proposed removal of historic dormer windows. You'll note my earlier comment that this is not understood to be an original feature, but we're not entirely certain of its age. Is not supported by policy, and the design of the proposed dormer extension was considered to be unsympathetic in its massing. Its massing was specifically identified as a concern given the rear of the property is prominently visible from the adjacent car park and rear service lane. If I just flick back to the aerial view, that might give an indication of where we're talking about. So the rear lane just runs along here, dog legs off. So to some extent, the rear of the property can be seen, and it's also visible, or the side view is visible in approach along the street there, which yeah, it's probably further back up the street, but I can get Google Street View if that would help. Sorry to flick around through the presentation. So yes, ultimately the officer concluded that the proposed dormer extension would be at odds with its context, and overall the proposal was therefore considered to have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. Policy conflicts were identified with Scottish planning policy, historic environment policy for Scotland, as well as policies D1 relating to quality placemaking by design and H1 relating to residential areas, also D4 relating to historic environment of the local development plan, as well as guidance contained in the Householder Development Guide and Historic Environment Scotland's Managing Change guidance relating to roofs. Lastly, the officer also noted that there was conflict with equivalent policies or emerging policies in the proposed local development plan. In terms of the applicant's case for review, a statement has been submitted in support of the application for review. Again, that's available in the agenda pack. Main points being contends that the guidance should be applied flexibly and with regard to circumstances rather than used as a rigid set of rules to be applied in all cases. Considers that a site visit from members would be invaluable in terms of understanding this local context, and highlights that over 50% of the existing roof would remain unaffected by the proposal, and that the rear of the property would not be visible from either Blenheim Place or Osborne Place, with only views being for pedestrians from a side view walking up Blenheim Place from Carden Place. Disputes the importance placed on views of the rear of the property, for example from the lane and car park that we saw there, and contends that the finishes are intended to complement the existing property. Also points to a rear dormers at numbers 28 and 30 Fountain Hall Road as being justification for this proposal, and highlights a general variety in dormer arrangement in the surrounding area. So just on the basis that that one was highlighted, photographs were also included by the applicant in that supporting statement. So this is the two properties in question. That's number 28 and number 30, I believe. Just having looked at the planning history of those, number 30 was approved in August 2014, which was prior to the adoption of the current supplementary guidance and local development plan. And number 28, there's no record on file for that, which suggests that it may be from pre-1984, which is where our sort of electronic records cease. In terms of consultations, that's just another view of the same two dormers, really. And I'll come on to the policy afterwards. But in terms of consultation, the local Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council provided no response to the proposal, and there were no representations from members of the public. As I mentioned before, the appellant is suggesting that members undertake a site visit, but I'll just hand back to you, Chair, to decide whether you think that's warranted in this case.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Evans. You'll have heard, obviously, that there's been a request by the applicant that we take a site visit. But members, what I would ask is, do you believe that you have sufficient information today to make the decision today? Obviously, Mr. Evans can provide us Google Street View if we require it. Are you content to take the decision today, Councillor Hendrickson?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Councillor Reynolds?
Yes, I am.
Councillor Reynolds, all I can see is that's it.
Sorry.
It looks like you're looking over a wall there. Thank you, Councillor. I'm content. I know the area very well, and I think with this and get any understanding that we require if need be. So I think we will proceed with the review today. Mr. Evans, if I could hand back to you, if you could take us through the relevant policies.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully the presentation will just pop up there. So again, the application site is within a residentially zoned area where the local development plan policy H1 would apply. The same policy tests as would apply to the previous case are relevant here. So firstly, do members feel this proposal represents overdevelopment? Would it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? Would it result in loss of open space? Again, this is a residential view and there's no public open space affected. And lastly, would it comply with relevant supplementary guidance? There's two relevant documents in this case because the guidance for dormer windows is contained in the Householder Development Guide, and then there's a separate document relating to the replacement of windows and doors. So we'll come to those just in a moment. Again, policy D1 relating to design quality applies, requiring that development will be assessed against the following criteria: distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, adaptable and resource efficient. Policy D4, also relevant in this case on the basis of the site's location in a conservation area. So this states that Aberdeen City Council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance. Also states that high quality design which respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment and protects the special architectural and historic interest of its listed buildings and conservation areas will be supported. So turning to the supplementary guidance. Firstly, the Householder Development Guide sets out some general principles for dormer windows, as well as some more specific guidance in relation to dormer windows on the rear elevations of older or more traditional properties. So firstly, those general principles require that extensions should be architecturally compatible with the original house or property, and as well as the surrounding area. So matters like design and scale will be relevant in your consideration. Materials also. Proposals should not dominate or overwhelm an original property, and original properties should remain visually dominant. Sorry, I've tripped myself up there. Yes, extension should remain visually subordinate or subservient. Extension should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight or general amenity. And lastly, approvals predating this guidance will not be treated as representing a precedent in decision making. So dormer windows, general principles. Firstly, new dormers should respect the scale of the building and should not dominate, overwhelm or unbalance the original roof. I think this is a key sort of element of the appointed officer's reasoning here. I think the view was taken that this proposed dormer window would be of a scale that would dominate or overwhelm the original roof. On traditional properties, original dormers must be retained and repaired, and their removal or replacement with larger or more modern dormers will not be permitted. In this case, as I mentioned before, advice from our master planning, conservation and design team is that their view is that this does not appear to be an original feature of the property, although they couldn't be entirely certain about its date exactly. On individual properties or in terraces where there are existing well-designed dormers and where there's adequate roof space, the construction of new dormers which match those existing may be acceptable. Additional dormers will not be permitted, however, if this results in the roof appearing overcrowded. Dormers should be closely modelled in their detail and position on the roof on existing good examples and will normally align with windows on lower floors. In the case of non-listed buildings in conservation areas, so that this property falls into that category, consideration may be given to the provision of linked panels between windows on the private side of the building, where the extension is not seen from any public area. So an issue for you to consider here is to what extent you consider the visibility of the property from the rear lane and the car park of the adjoining businesses to be, you know, prominent from a public area to the extent that a linking panel might not be supported. Then turning next to dormer windows, criteria for older properties of a traditional character specific to rear elevations. Firstly, the aggregate area of all dormers should not dominate the original roof slope, really replicating earlier points. Dormer haffets, so just meaning the sides, should be a minimum of 400 millimeters in from the inside face of the gable tabling. In this case, it's approximately, if I just flick back to this view, it's approximately 1 meter in from the gable tabling on the left-hand side of this this image, and 1.5 meters to the right hand side, so not falling foul of that one. The front face of the dormer extension should be a minimum of 400 millimeters back from the front edge of the roof, so just talking about here, but not so far back that the dormer appears to be pushed unnaturally up the roof slope. As you'll see, the dormer is sort of centrally positioned within the, broadly centrally positioned within the roof, slightly off to the left-hand side, and the distance from the front edge of the roof is approximately 600 millimeters. So again, complying with that criteria. Flat roofs on box dormers should be a reasonable distance below the ridge. Again, there's a matter of judgment involved in what's reasonable, but in this case, there's a fairly comfortable distance there, which is 880 mils. I've just taken to be from measuring off the drawing. Windows should be located at both ends of box dormers. You can see that that is the case on this image. A small apron may be permitted below a rear window. There is a very small apron here, you know, it's just maybe a single slate, sorry, not a single slate, but a single slate size. This isn't actually clad in slate, I should point out. And solid panels between windows and box dormers may be permitted, but should not dominate the dormer elevation. In this case, the solid linking panel here is approximately a metre wide, which represents just over 16% of the overall dormer width. So it's for you to decide whether you feel that would dominate it. So, sorry, just flicking on to the next supplementary guidance document relating to windows. There we are. So the repair and replacement of windows and doors. The first principle is one of retaining and repairing original or historic windows, and this will always be promoted over replacement. As we heard before, these are not original windows, they're aluminium coated windows, so there's no issue in policy terms with those being replaced. It's just a matter of what they're replaced with. Opportunities to replace unsympathetic windows will be supported. Reinstatement of original types and arrangements will be encouraged. As I said before, these are what's proposed are working timber sliding sash and case windows, and cross sections have been provided that demonstrate that these are of the sort of expected dimensions. If existing non-historic windows on the public elevation of an unlisted building within a conservation area are being replaced, the reinstatement of the original types and arrangements of windows will be encouraged. So, for example, timber sash and case windows. Factors including materials, means of opening, colour, etc. will be of relevance. What I would say is that the colour of the windows isn't specified on the drawings, so that's something that you may want to seek clarification on in the event that you're minded to overturn the appointed officer's decision. In terms of the dormer window, the central, sorry if I can flip back to that image again, the central linking panel here is shown as being clad in larch, which would be allowed to weather naturally. So as much as that sort of looks similar to the slate of the roof, it's actually formed in timber cladding, and that's the same down the sides. So these haffets are also formed in larch, just allowed to weather naturally rather than being treated or coated. So back to the Windows guidance, I'm afraid. Detailed cross sections of sash and case windows required to ensure adherence to criteria are stated in the supplementary guidance. Those cross sections have been provided as part of the application drawings. A condition would ordinarily be applied in relation to the visible proportion of that window frame, because the cross section in the window frame detail in itself is fine, but what's more important is actually how much of it is visible within the window opening, if you see what I mean, to ensure that those window frames don't look unduly thick or chunky. In terms of other material considerations, Scottish planning policy sets out that proposals in conservation areas should preserve or enhance the character and appearance of a conservation area, and proposals that do not harm the character or appearance should be treated as preserving it. Historic Environment Scotland's Managing Change series has a document or a publication in relation to windows, which again highlights that maintenance and repair of historic windows is a preferred means of safeguarding the character of the building. Where a window is beyond repair, replacement may be permitted. In this case, obviously, the original windows have long since been lost. In replacing sash windows, materials other than timber will rarely be acceptable. Again, the originals have already gone, and there is a benefit in terms of the material being introduced in replacing the existing coated aluminium windows. In other cases, windows may be modern replacements, sometimes inexact copies of original examples or using inappropriate sections or materials, and in such cases it should be acceptable to replace the windows with the aim of regaining the original design intention or improving the existing situation. So in removing those clad aluminium windows and replacing with timber sash and case, that's a desirable outcome in terms of reinstating the historic materials and window form. In terms of roofs, there's another Managing Change publication highlights that the significance of a roof is derived from its shape, profile, pitch, covering and materials, for example. It's important to understand a roof's contribution to a building's character and to protect a building's special character through the reuse of existing historic materials and close matching of new materials. I mentioned before that the dormer is proposed to be clad in larch timber cladding rather than in slates, which might ordinarily be the case. The alteration of a roof can create additional space to allow the building as a whole to remain in use and develop with the needs of the occupants. In considering how to alter a roof, it is important to understand the appearance of the building or street as a whole. The potential for cumulative effects of similar developments should also be considered. Early historic dormers should be retained. The addition of new features to principal or prominent roof slopes should generally be avoided. New dormers should be appropriately designed and located with care. So I did mention before that the existing dormers are not understood to be original to the building. However, you will note that the design of them incorporated traditional features such as the sort of painted roof, the use of natural slate, these sorts of things, and the absence of a sort of central linking panel. So as much as they are not original, they are certainly relatively sympathetic to the historic character of the building. And the question may be whether you feel the proposed dormer window is equally sympathetic. As I mentioned, the proposal or the application site lies within the Albine Place and Rubislaw Conservation Area, so the character appraisal for that conservation area is also of relevance. This divides the conservation area into 5 distinct character areas, Blenheim Place lying within character area C, which is snappily titled North and South of Queen's Road but East of Rubislaw Den. Character area C is noted for its wide tree-lined streets with a number of back lanes, granite buildings with slate roofs and a lack of dormers apart from the eastern section of Osborne Place. On the rear elevation of the application site and the surrounding properties, you will note that there is a general absence of dormer windows, and those that have been added are more modern additions. The character appraisal includes a SWOT analysis, which concludes that overall an identified strength of the conservation area is its retention of the original dormer pattern on residential streets, identifies weaknesses including the removal of timber sash and case windows, so there's this proposal has a benefit in that regard, the variety of window styles and materials in flatted properties and front box dormers. Opportunities include the repair and replacement of windows with those of a traditional style, proportion and materials. And also notes that unsympathetic development that does not reflect or relate to the character of the conservation area is identified as a specific threat to its quality. Following key points for decision making for members. Oh, sorry, I missed a slide there. That's just the points I've just covered. So following points are of relevance for summing up. First, zoning. Do members consider that the proposed works would adversely affect the character or amenity of the area as required by policy H1? Do the proposed alterations accord with the relevant supplementary guidance on windows and dormers, also tied to policy H1? And specifically, is the replacement of the existing non-original windows with timber sash and case frames supported by the windows and doors guidance? and also is the removal of the existing dormer windows in replacement with a new dormer as proposed, supported by the Householder Development Guide, having regard for its scale, form and relationship with the building and the surrounding character. In terms of the historic environment, do members feel that the proposed works would preserve or enhance the character and amenity of the conservation area as set out in Scottish planning policy and Historic Environment Scotland's policy and supporting documentation? And lastly, design. Is the proposal of sufficient design quality which is appropriate to its context? If members need any assistance with setting out reasons or the use of any conditions, happy to assist or take any questions. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Members, questions for Mr. Evans? Councillor Hendrickson. I can't hear you. You're on mute, Councillor Hendrickson.
Sorry, Convener.
That's okay. No problem.
Yeah. Would it be possible to have a look at the view of the property from the lane on Street View? I did have a look at it earlier, but when I first got the papers, and I think it's actually quite relevant. You actually get quite a good view of some of the issues.
Yeah, that's no problem, Councillor Henriksen. So this is just the approach along Blenheim Place. So you can just see in the distance, that's the sort of side view of the dormer at present. I'll just see if I can pop us over onto the rear lane. Oh. A little bit. So it's just at that curve in the lane at that dog leg where you get quite a clear view.
Yeah. That helpful, Councillor Hendrickson?
Yeah, it's.
Do you want to go further along the lane to see the other houses?
I think if you go just along to where the new garages are, it's the view from there that I was sort of.
Just a little further along between.
Yeah, just here. I mean, if you're actually walking, the impact from the lane, looking at it with the property isn't. I'm not convinced how much of an impact it would be to remove them. The other thing I was thinking about, would there be any way we could put a condition in so that instead of being the timber on the side of the dormer, we could actually say that it would be slate?
Yeah, that's a tricky one again. It's sort of similar in some ways to the previous case with the fence, where we would almost be altering the nature of the proposal and what's being applied for, where it's just securing the detail and where there's some uncertainty about it, that's one thing, but where it's actually changing what's being applied for, that's perhaps trickier.
Yeah, and as we go along the lane, looking at the backs of the other properties on that, there's no dormer windows or non-traditional dormer. Well, I'm not sure you can actually see many of them.
It's quite hard
We might get an aerial view, would we, Gavin?
Yeah, can do that.
I was just looking at the impact of that area from the lane.
Just need to remember how to get out of here.
That's it.
I think I might actually be better in the council's GIS, more familiar.
Yeah.
There we go. So that aerial view is from 2019, just to bear in mind. So this is the application property here, and just continuing along the lane. So you can see the rear roof slopes on Blenheim Place. There are some dormers.
But they're traditional style. Okay. That's helpful.
On the other side of the lane, there's numerous dormers.
Yeah, you can see the distinction between, for example, there's these ones obviously have that sort of ridged, pinned roof and are smaller, and then you can see the sort of larger flat expanse. That's possibly numbers 28 and 30 that we're looking at over there, maybe the two side by side.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Henriksen, at this stage?
Not at this stage, Convener, no.
Councillor Reynolds, have you got any questions?
Not really. I think my question would have been answered there, because I would have preferred to see slates as against the larch as well, but we're not allowed to consider a change in the material being used, then my question is non-relevant.
I haven't actually got any questions. I think Mr. Evans has been very thorough with the information he's provided, and as I say, I'm quite familiar with the area, and obviously there's a number of things that overlay this area, and particularly with the conservation status. Okay, members, if we haven't got any further questions, if we could maybe enter into discussion around this. I'll perhaps take in Councillor Henriksen, then I'll maybe add something, and then Councillor Reynolds might. Councillor Henriksen.
Thank you, Convener. For me, it's actually proving to be quite difficult, because again, I know we're not supposed to set precedent, but on the other side of the street, the dormers have actually been put in. I mean, I would personally, on a personal basis, I would have liked to have seen perhaps a more sympathetic design to the dormers. Possibly, if we could have, I know we can't stipulate this now, but if they, for example, kept the original roof, the gable bits, and then maybe filled in across, I think that would have been much more sympathetic. Yeah, I'm torn by this one. Like Councillor Reynolds, it would have been nice to have had slate put in place, which would again, I think, been more in keeping with the roof. With regards to the rest of the windows and all the rest of it, I don't have a problem with those. Excuse me, at all. I think that's quite a good move in a conservation area, but I'm not convinced that this design is sympathetic with the building. I think it could have been done better. The view from the back lane is not as clear as because you have the new garage in the background, which I think has been done quite sympathetically for the area. I'm just not convinced that these dormers are as sympathetic as they perhaps could have been.
Thank you, Councillor Henriksen. One of the benefits of chairing the LRB across the city, apart from my own ward, is you see other examples of dormers and in conservation areas, and I recall one particularly in Berry Hill area, where whilst they had they did join up the two existing windows or replace them, but it was done far more sympathetically in terms of it wasn't a flat box dormer, and I do, regardless of where they are, and what we have to recognise, and I think Mr. Evans did mention this, was that those previous ones that have been highlighted were done post the current LDP guidance or the proposed LDP guidance. In fact, one of them we don't even couldn't find the record of. So, I don't think we need to worry about them setting a precedent that we have to follow, because what we're looking at is what we have in the current guidance, and even whether that's a proposed plan or an existing plan. I feel that this dormer, does have conflict with a number of our policies, and I don't think I think I agree with both of you as well. The larch is not an addition that I would see in such a prominent site, because it is an end of terrace, if you like, position that would be compatible with the conservation area. I think that I absolutely 100% agree that people need to be able to maximise the space internally. having seen it done elsewhere in conservation areas, I think you can still get that additional space, but with more sympathetic design on the, you know, that's visually apparent to those outside. So, you know, from my point of view, you know, I think the officer is completely right on her determination on this application. And, you know, I don't think there's anything that we could add in terms of any sort of conditions that would sway me otherwise. Councillor Reynolds. You're on mute.
That's it, I think, is it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Yes, my apologies there. No, I think you guys have said it all. I can't add to that. I'm very sympathetic for what the officers' reasons are for refusal, etc. Would agree with them. I think they need to come back with another proposal that is more in keeping. Certainly, you know, I think we've all mentioned the larch, etc. And I do appreciate that larch does weather. There's no doubt about it. It does weather. It does go grey. I've seen that on so many occasions. But I think in that particular instance, in that particular location, the larch just would not fit in, and certainly slate would be far, far better. I know that you can't get a dead perpendicular situation with slate, and it has to be laid back slightly. But I would have preferred to see that. So I cannot go against the officer's recommendations on this.
Right, so can I just conclude? Obviously, Councillor Hendrickson, can you just confirm that you're also minded to support the officer's recommendation of refusal?
That is correct, Convener.
So that's a unanimous decision of the LRB. Whilst we're all comfortable with the what's being proposed for the replacement of the windows to the front, I think we're all minded that the issue is the dormer window, and for that reason we would really support the officer's recommendation of refusal. Mr. Caston, do you need anything further from us?
No, I think you've covered that very clearly.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. That concludes the business of the LRB for today. First one of 2021. Keep having to remind myself it's 2021. So thank you for your attendance today. And Mr. Thompson, there's nothing you require from us either as our legal support?
No, not just now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Councillor Bolton, could I speak to you afterwards?
Absolutely.